he keeps the E on paste, and then he keeps the E on paste, and then he just pastes it every time he needs to write E. So like it's I'm just trying to text a couple people. I'll use my phone. I'm trying to text a couple people, but it's not working well because
what brand of computer does he use?
What
brand of computer?
It's a Lenovo.
That's a pretty good computer.
Yeah, well, it's a key. I don't think it's the keyboard's fault because he's just a second. I don't think it's the keyboard's fault because it works when he's not on Zoom. Only when he's on Zoom does the E key not work. So it's a kind of an interesting mess. Yeah. All right. So let's start. Just send out a couple more messages.
Excuse me, Billy. I'm sorry.
All right, let's get started. So yeah, yesterday was the first time in a long time that no one came for shul. I was actually prepared for it because I figured it's snowy and everything like that, and it snowed and it's very icy out there. Especially, I was just on the street here this morning. I mean, there's some puddles on the street around the neighborhood, which are extremely icy. And they melt during the day and then they freeze up at night. But we'll start this week's Parsha. Last week's Parsha was a special one, and this week is also very special. Actually, it's one that the community likes because it's very short. And we read the Torah very quickly. It's very, very, very short. What? Yeah. So it's called Parshas Yisro. Yisro is the Parsha about Jethro. Jethro is one of the very interesting personalities in the Torah. The Torah doesn't say that much about him, but the Midrash does. He was apparently a pretty popular guy back then in the biblical era. One of the things that he's popular for, the Torah says right away in the beginning, it says, Yisro heard, Yitro, he heard everything that happened to the Jewish people, and it gives him a title. The title is, he says, it's Moses' father-in-law. So Moses is pretty famous, right? So that's kind of a famous connection. And it says, the Kohen of Midian, the priest of Midian. Now, to my understanding, there were a lot of priests in Midian, but he was the high priest of Midian. Midian was a country which, a nation, actually. Later on, the Jews kind of waged war with them. They wage a whole war with them. And that's all the way later on in the Torah. But Yisro is the priest of Midian. The Jewish tradition tells us that Yisro was a type of guy who basically served every type of idol. He was an expert in idolatry. He had served every type of idol. I don't know why, but for some reason, I always imagined him. When I was a kid, sometimes I had friends living in Berkeley, California, and I would go there for Shabbos to my friend's house. And the Chabad house there was wild. I mean, the people were wild. You had all sorts of hippies and everything like that. Many of them were Orthodox Jews, but there were a lot of them who kind of, you talk to them, they'd been there and done it, everything. They just, you talk to them about boats. Oh, they used to be a boat sailor. You talk to them about medicine. They used to be a doctor. You talk to them about drugs. They used to do that. Just, they've been there and done. Everyone, they say that every Chabad has at least one guy like that. Just a guy who's kind of been there and done everything. They spent time acting, hunting. Were they married? Oh, they married many times, There's also an interesting guy in Israel who I spoke about before. I've spoken about him many times, named Guru Gil Locks, the Goodman Locks. He lives in the old city of Jerusalem, and he's at the Kotel. He puts tefillin on maybe 25,000 people a year. That's all he does the whole day. But he, in his biography, was basically a guru in Central Park. But he also spent time in India. He tried every cult, every single thing, right? Yet he came and he found Judaism. So that's what happened with Yisro. Yisro, actually, we find early in the Torah that his daughters are abused because everyone sees that, their leader has now kind of left idolatry and is now doing monotheism. So that's the story of Yisro. Yisro comes now. He's going to come and spend a little bit of time with Moses, being his father-in-law. He's going to give him some advice. And then he's going to go home and convert his whole family and come back to the Jewish people and join the Jewish people. And actually, yesterday's Haftorah, we talk about his great-great-great-great-grandchildren living in Israel. And, he joined the Jewish nation. Yisro, he gives Moshe some advice, and we'll talk about that advice today. It's kind of very interesting advice, somewhat concerning, actually. Then the Torah talks about the giving of the Torah, of course. The giving of the Torah happened this is one of the greatest events in human history, perhaps the greatest. It says in the Jewish tradition, it happened and will never happen again. God gathered millions of Jewish people, 600,000 men, but millions of Jewish men, women, and children, different ages, and he revealed himself to them. And he gave them the 10 commandments. That's in this week's portion. We'd read it in the Torah this Shabbos, the 10 commandments. It's a special aliyah. We also read it, on Shavuos time. We read the 10 commandments essentially 3 times a year. But today, this week, I don't know if we'll have a minyan Shabbos, doubtfully. We'll see. Are you guys getting your second shot this week?
No.
Okay.
No, not till the 13th.
All right. Well, so, we'll see when we have a minyan again. We'll see when that happens. But anyways, just give me a second. Anyways, we read about the giving of the Torah this week, the 10 commandments, and then we have some mitzvahs at the end, which kind of, several of them, they kind of warn us not to do idolatry because the Jewish people saw a lot of different visions, and they, sometimes we see things and we translate it into other things, right? So that is kind of how humans are. So the Torah says anything you saw, don't fall into any idolatry. Of course, we find later that they did the golden calf. Then we have the Haftorah. The Haftorah is Isaiah becoming a prophet. And it's a very interesting, actually. In the beginning, he talks about how he sees God and he sees the angels in heaven. And that's how he starts off the Haftorah. And he's going to warn the Jews that they're going to sin, they're going to get in trouble, but the Jews will never be fully destroyed. And that's what we read in Haftarah. So I always like to talk about Yisro, and I always like to talk about the kind of the story in the beginning of the Parsha, and how interesting of a person he is, and how the story in the beginning of the Parsha is somewhat troubling. Now, at the beginning of the Parsha, we find that Yisro comes and Moses greets him. Now, Yisro himself, he's coming to the leader of leaders. I mean, Moses is the greatest prophet ever. I remember reading one of the books, one of the old philosophical Jewish book from the 1300s, and it said Moses was different than all other prophets. All other prophets were they'd hear things in metaphor. They wouldn't fully see it. They wouldn't fully envision it. Moses, it says, was not just a prophet. This is the word it used, he was a shaliach. He was a messenger of God. Moses' prophecy had to be perfection because the whole Judaism is based on Moses' prophecy. So if you have a prophet who's 50% accurate, right? And another prophet who's 75% accurate comes, then we'll have to downgrade the first prophet and say, sorry, let's listen to the second one. Moses had to be the fullest extent. That's why Moses was able to talk to God while he was awake. He was able to, no confusion. In fact, the Talmud says in this week's Haftorah, says, so God reveals himself to Isaiah in a dream, and he sees God on a throne, and God's feet are in the temple in Jerusalem, right? And there's a lot, and there's angels flying around, and there's a lot in Jewish commentary about what this means. It's so incredible how God is present in our temples, right? On Temple of Jerusalem, God is fully present there. But one of the rabbis in the Talmud asks, he says, how could it be that Moses asks later on in the Torah, Moses is going to ask God, can I see you? And what does God say? God shows him his back. He says, you can't see my face, right? And here Isaiah goes and he sees him. So the Talmud answers, it says, Moses saw bas baklaria ha'me'ira. Moses had like the magnifying glass, which is clear. Moses was able to see things really. Isaiah was able to kind of take metaphors and have an understanding. Isaiah was looking from afar. He wasn't able to see how things truly, truly are. So that's why he thought he saw God. And actually in the Haftarah, it says he was a little upset. And it's because sometimes when you see something so clearly, you realize that you're not really seeing it that much, right? When you see something so clearly that, let's say, you see something that a great scientist or great brilliant person is having a hard time and you see it and there's no issues, you kind of feel like, gee, maybe I'm not seeing the full picture. So that's what happened with Isaiah. But Moses was able to see God in the fullest extent. Just because some of us read the book this year of Subota, I want to just share a story that I read about him. This is a funny story, which kind of reminds me of this idea. There was a guy in Belgium. He was very wealthy. He was, he had run into Russia from Poland during the Holocaust, and he was arrested, thrown in prison, like many of them. So anyways, he later came out and he moved to Belgium and he was very wealthy. Anyways, the author of Subota, he was a fundraising for a certain charity in Israel and he used to go to Belgium every year. Anyways, this guy said, come, you stay at my house. And this was a rabbi, he was very wealthy and everything, but he gave so much honor to the author, Lazer Nanas. He gave so much honor to him. He would, literally just serve him and everything, give him the best of everything. So his grandson said, why are you honoring him so much? Many rabbis come stay in our house. Many great rabbis from great charities in Israel come. But why are you honoring him so much? So his grandfather said, my grandson, because this man spoke to Elijah the prophet. In the Talmud, it talks about how Elijah the prophet never died, right? In the Tanakh, the prophets, it says he went up in a chariot of fire to heaven and he comes down, he visits people. He visits people. In the Talmud, there's several people who are visited. In the Jewish history, there are great rabbis who are visited by Elijah the prophet. Elijah visits people in person, right? In flesh and blood. So he said, this Lazer Nanas, I saw him speaking with Elijah the prophet. His grandson said, really? He said, yes, I saw him in the Siberian camp. He was speaking with Elijah the prophet. He says, what do you mean? He said, one time I came and I saw, it was the middle of the night. And I saw he was talking to someone and I couldn't even see them, but he was speaking out loud to them. It must have been Elijah the prophet. Anyways, this grandson, I'm just sharing this story to bring out the idea of sometimes we don't see the full picture, but Moses did see the full picture. Anyways, this grandson moves to Israel. He starts studying in yeshiva in Israel. And one of the perks he has, his grandfather tells him, go hang around in this rabbi's house as much as possible. Rabbi Lazer Nanas had he used to open his house Friday night. After the meal, people would come and they would hear stories from him and teachings and everything. So he started hanging around and studying with him. And one day he asked him at point blank, he said, my grandfather says you saw Elijah the prophet. Is that true? So Rabbi Lazer Nanas, he suffered 20 years in Siberia. He bursts out laughing. He says, no, it's not true. Let me tell you the story. He says, in Siberian camp, your grandfather, this is what happened. Oh, this is what happened to me. He says, I one time had the opportunity to take a bath in the bathhouse. I figured out the off hours. I quickly went in. Anyways, while I was in there was a guard who was supposed to be on guard also taking a bath. When he saw me, he got so scared that I would rat on him. I would tattle to him. He said, please don't tell anyone I'm here. He tells this to the prisoner. So the prisoner, Rabbi Lazer Nanas, says to him, let me ask you a question. Are you Jewish? He says, yes. The officer is Jewish. The guard's Jewish. He says, do you know anything about Judaism? He says, no, I don't know anything. I grew up in a communist home. He says, okay, let me teach you. How about this? I won't tell on you. Every night after work at midnight where you're guarding, I'll come and I'll just teach you things from afar and I'll say them over as loud as I can. Teach you the Torah. Anyways, I used to go there every night after work. I used to go and I said, I'll stand from afar. You'll be a high up on the guard post and I'll teach you different things about Judaism. People will think I'm crazy talking to nobody and you'll be listening. Anyways, he said that guy eventually became religious. But here's the other side of the story. Your grandfather was in another camp nearby and it was during World War II and he was literally starving. There was nothing to eat. And in the book you read, you had to work the norms, you had to get your food, you had to work and he wasn't strong enough. And it's a vicious cycle. You get weaker when you don't eat, you can't work as much. And someone said, we can't help you here, but if you go through the forest here, escape the camp, go into the other camp, you'll meet a Jew there named Rabbi Eliezer Nanis, and he'll help you. He'll give you whatever he can. So he said, if I go through, I might get shot. If I get out of the camp, I go through the forest. But if I don't, I'll just for sure die from hunger. Anyways, your grandfather came, he climbed over, he came in and he said, wow, now I'm in this camp in the middle of the night. Where am I going to find this rabbi? Lo and behold, he sees the rabbi with a beard and everything and payas. He's calling out, he's talking to someone in the middle of nowhere. He says, he must be talking to Elijah the prophet. I'm going to go bother him. I can't bother him. So he tells him, he says, I wasn't talking to Elijah the prophet. I was talking to this guard who was in his guard post. But I give credit to your grandfather. He hadn't eaten in days, yet he didn't want to disturb me, because he thought I was talking to Elijah the prophet. He was like sacrificing himself. He's like, I can't, Elijah only comes to very righteous people, very extremely righteous people. So anyways, he told him that story. The boy went back to his grandfather. His grandfather was a man who he was very wealthy, very powerful person in the community. And he turns to his grandson and says, look, I know what it looks like when someone's talking to Elijah the prophet. He was talking to Elijah the prophet. Anyways, that's the story. But either way, we see that Moses is the greatest prophet. And now this fellow, the Kohen of Midian, comes. There's a dispute when he came. Did he come after the giving of the Torah or before the giving of the Torah? The Torah says he came after he heard what happened to the Jewish people. What did he hear exactly? There's a dispute at the Talmud. Did he hear about the splitting of the sea or the giving of the Torah or the war with Amalek, the Amalekites? But he comes and he right away, they greet him. They have a big feast and everything like that. And then he tells Moses off. Now, this guy is the priest of Midian. I mean, he's the greatest idolater in that time. I mean, of course, he repented, but he was the greatest idolater. He tells Moses off. He sees that Moses is the single judge of the Jewish people. Moses is, there's millions of Jewish people. The Torah is relatively new, right? The Torah is relatively new. And he sees that Moses is the only judge. Everyone's coming before Moses and he's judging their cases. What cases? Lawsuits, fraud, divorces, all sorts of different, anything you to bring to a court. Moses is the judge. Yisro tells him, Naval Tibol. He says, you're going to get very tired if you do this. You're the only judge. He says, you have to go and hire other judges and teach them. And those judges will judge smaller cases, the small claims, and you'll be like the Supreme Court. If they can't figure out the law in those small cases, then eventually it will come to you, right? So Moses says, okay, I'll do that. Anyways, I believe Moses hires judges over 1,000, over hundreds, over 50, right? They're little judges, little communal judges. And altogether, he hires about 78,000 judges. He tries to get good people who are worthy. This was millions and millions of people. So he has these thousands of judges under him, and now Moses is able to judge properly. So this is a question a lot of the commentaries ask. Yisro was frankly new to Judaism. He didn't leave Egypt. Yisro was actually in Egypt. We spoke 2 weeks ago. He was an advisor in Egypt. He was one of Pharaoh's advisors. He had really been around the block. He had been in Midian. He was a great priest. And now he comes and right away he goes to the priest of priests, the man of perfection, where Maimonides says, one of the foundations of our religion is that Moses is perfect. Because if Moses has any problem and we find someone who's greater, that's the right religion, right? Everything we have in Judaism comes through Moses. Moses guided us. He showed God to us, right? How could it be that Yisro comes and tells Moses, and Moses says, okay, I'll listen to you? That's a lot of respect to your father-in-law, but maybe it's a little too much, right? So what exactly is going on here? Furthermore, what was Moses thinking in the in the first place? Yisro says, you're going to get tired. And Moses says, you're right. I'm going to get tired, right? He didn't realize he's going to get tired. He didn't realize that he's not going to be a good judge. I mean, Moses is the judge, he's the greatest judge ever. He would for sure not do anything that would harm anyone, right? And judge when he's tired. We know in the Talmud, there's many stories of different judges who were worried of a little bit of bribery, just even a slight, there's a story of a rabbi who was a Kohen. And now everyone had to give taxes to the Kohen every year. So someone gave him the tax. Now you could choose which Kohen you wanted to give to, right? Right? So, nowadays, if Mashiach was here and we all had to give the taxes, Jerry would probably give to Michael Cohen. He's a Kohen, right? And you could give to any Kohen. So anyways, this guy says, oh, well, you're my rabbi. I'll give it to you. He gave it to his rabbi. The next day they were supposed to be in court. This rabbi was judging a case. He said, sorry, I'm out of here. I'm not judging it. Even though you owe me the money, right? Even though you have to pay it. I'm not judging you. I'm going to be very, very careful. In Talmud class, we studied on Thursday, we said that there are 7 opinions of the type of guy who, you said there's someone who destroys the world, right? So one of the opinions says someone who listens or someone who goes in and gives his story in a court case before the other guy, right? So Moses, how could Moses not realize he was tired? We're only dealing with other people's money, right? How could he not realize that he was tired and vulnerable? So this is a question a lot of commentaries ask, and we're going to give a certain perspective here, which is very interesting, and it's going to relate to a lot of other things in the portion this week. It's going to relate to a lot of other details in the Parsha. So we have a similar case, a similar story in Deuteronomy. What happens? God is giving the Torah. He's saying the 10 Commandments. And what does Moses want? He wants the Jewish people to listen directly to God, right? God starts speaking. The Talmud says, what happens? Everyone dies. Everyone dies. They couldn't hear God's voice. It was like too powerful, right? It was too mighty. It was too paradoxical. It was like they weren't able to exist with hearing God's voice. Actually, it says that their souls flew out of their bodies. There's this concept in Judaism. We don't struggle with it so much nowadays, but if you get too spiritual, you die, right? It's like their souls heard God's voice. They're like, we're done with this lowly world. We don't like it. So anyways, they try again and they die again. God resurrects them, right? For God, resurrection of the dead is no big deal. So they tell Moses, they say, Moses, we don't want to hear it from God. We want to hear from you. Moses is a little upset. He says, what, you don't want to hear it from God himself? Why would you want to hear it from me? I'm an intermediary. They say, no, Moses, we want to hear from you. And it says Moses actually became weak. What exactly is going on here? How could Moses make a mistake and let the Jewish people die hearing it from God, right? How could that happen? Like, what are the two sides to the coin here? So Moses says you should hear from God, and the Jewish people say, no. Moses says, whoops, sorry. I didn't realize you guys would get torched, right? If you heard it from God. So we have a similar thing here. When Moses sees something, as we said in the beginning, we said Moses is a spaklaria ha'meira. Moses' reality is only godly. Moses sees God in everything. The rest of the Jewish people do not. We have to find God in everything, right? So we have Moses seeing God in everything. We have Moses who is able to see God tangibly present. And we have the rest of the Jewish people who are not able to see it, but we're able to find it. Does everyone get the difference between seeing it and finding it? Right? When you see something and find something? It's almost like, actually, rabbis put it another way. Difference between seeing and hearing something. Seeing and hearing something. If I tell Jerry that I resurrected someone from the dead today, he probably won't believe me, right? Probably won't believe me.
You're right, man.
But if I do it in front of him, he'll have no choice but to believe me. In fact, he might say something like, "This is unbelievable," right?
Well, maybe he had a cardiac arrest and you defibrillated him.
That's possible.
You know, all right. Well, so let's raise the stakes. I walk into a cemetery, there's bones there, dig them up, and I bring them back to life, right? If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. In fact, you'd probably unfriend me on Facebook, right? But if I showed it to you, you'd probably believe me, right? This is the difference between seeing and hearing something. When you see something, it's very real. When you hear something, it has to kind of be developed in your mind, right? You have to develop it. You have to make sense of it. You have to absorb it. Moses was a seer. Moses could see godliness everywhere. It was so real to him. On the other hand, the rest of the Jewish people, we were hearers. We were finders. We got to find God and everything. We got to hear things, right? When you hear a story, let's say I said, Jerry, I resurrected someone from the dead today. And you didn't believe me. And I said, I have proof. Steve Nathanson was there. And he says, yeah, I was there. He did it, right? Then you for sure wouldn't believe it, right? Then if I said, okay, Steve was there. Well, okay, it's a little bit more believable. Try and find more explanations, right? That's called hearing something. That's absorbing something intellectually. When you absorb something intellectually, you always have questions. You never have certainty. When you see something, that's as certain as you can get. I mean, you can go and say, oh, maybe my eyes, maybe I've gone crazy, right? If a bunch of people see something, then it's even harder, right? You could, always question it, but it's as real as humans get. Seeing is believing, as the famous saying is. So Moses was able to see God everywhere. Yisro came, and Yisro, let's start with the Torah. Moses said, how wonderful is it if you'll hear it from God. Hear the Torah from God directly. The Jewish people get up, and God speaks, and they die. They can't hear it from God. Right? They can't. It's too lofty for them. It blows them over. They can't be in their bodies at the same time. So now they say, we want to hear from Moses. Moses hears it directly from God. He's able to hear it from God. And Moses takes it and he translates it to the Jewish people. One of the most common words in the Torah is the word lamar. Lamar means saying. We see in the Torah like thousands of times. It says, God spoke to Moses saying. So even children ask the question, what does it mean God spoke to Moses saying? That's a little bit redundant. If I say God spoke to Moses, go tell the Jewish people XYZ, right? Why does it say God spoke to Moses saying? So one of the commentaries explains that saying means that God, when he speaks to Moses, he doesn't speak in Hebrew. He speaks in a transcendent language that only Moses can understand. After Moses takes it, he's able to translate it to the Jewish people. Moses is essentially a translator of the Jewish people. So Moses wants the Jewish people to hear directly from God. The Jewish people tell Moses, the way you hear it, we'll die if we hear it. We want you to translate it for us so we can hear it the way we are and internalize it the way we are and live with it the way we hear it from you. So Moses was actually living in a total different world than the Jewish people. He wanted everyone to come to his level, but everyone said, no, you need to teach it to us in our time, in our language. And if you do that, then we can live with it and then we can internalize it. This is a very important lesson in the Torah. And actually we find with Yisro right at the beginning of the Torah, well, a lot of times people suffice and say, it's okay, Moses knows it. At least the rabbi understands it. At least Moses knows it. But in Judaism, it's very important. Every person themselves has to get it. And when you're trying to understand something yourself, it takes time, it takes place, it takes concentration, it takes dedication, right? A lot of times in the world, in world history, you have a malicious empire or a dictator or whatever it is, and people think he's really great in the beginning. But it takes time for the world to kind of absorb how the ideas are not good, right? If you're always helped out by Moses, and Moses is always dragging you out, you'll never learn for yourself. You never learn how to walk yourself. So the Jewish people tell Moses, they say, if we hear the Torah directly from God, we will not be able to live this way. We won't be able to understand it ourselves. We won't be able to teach it to our children. It's just going to be too wonderful and wondrous for us. Moses tells the Jewish people, okay, yeah, I'll translate it for you. Now you can take it and you can understand it and you can work with it. The same thing happens with Yisro. Yisro is a priest, as we said. He's a been there, done that type of guy. He's done all types of idolatries, and he sees that they ultimately don't work. Or, there's a lot of different opinions in Judaism about, the false idols. What extent, how false are they? Some opinions go so far and say, black magic and the superpowers of idols were somewhat real, but they were still fake. They could perform illusions and stuff like that, but they were still fake. Yisro goes and he tries everything and he says, this isn't the real deal. The real deal is God and the Torah. So he goes to Moses, and now Yisro is the type of guy who figured it out himself. He goes to Moses and he sees Moses is judging all the Jewish people. You know what that means? That means if I'm trying to sue Jerry and we go to Moses, Moses goes and he sees right away what God wants. And he says, okay, you're guilty. You owe him money, right? Do we question Moses? Of course we don't question Moses. Moses is so great. He's the man of truth. He always says the right thing. So what will happen would be something like this. Jerry would pay me the money I sued for him because Moses said he's guilty. And then Steve would come to Jerry and say, hey, Jerry, are you guilty? He said, yeah. Why are you guilty? I have no idea. What did you do wrong? I don't know. Moses said it. Moses is always right. There's certain people out there that when you're in their presence, they're right. They're so lofty. They're so holy. They would never be untruthful, right? Yisro comes and he says, if you want the Jewish law to stay amongst the Jewish people, then you need to hire regular judges, and they will try and understand it. And when we go to a regular judge, right? When we go to a regular judge and the judge says, Jerry, you're guilty, Jerry's going to say, hey, what are you talking about? I'm taking this up for court. This guy, this judge is a schmuck, right? He's wrong. He's this. He doesn't know how to, right? That's what will happen. Moses thought, that's not a good thing, right? Let's make things black and white. People will come to me. I'll judge each case. I'll replace 78,000 judges, right? Yisro said, no, you don't understand. It's true that you're a better judge than them. But if you teach all those judges how to judge, you will transform them. And then you will transform the people. Sometimes the slow way is the best way. Sometimes we get impatient and we avoid certain things, or we avoid certain hardship, but sometimes only through going through the hardship can we actually train and change this world. Only through taking the time to do something can we resolve things. This is what Yisro is telling Moshe. And Moshe says, I didn't think of it that way. I'm a leader. I get everything directly from God. I could teach it to the people. I could tell people exactly the way it is. But they'll follow, but they won't get it. Yisro says, he tells Moses, says, you're going to be wary. Simply, Moses is going to be day until night, right? But Yisro is telling Moses, he says, you're going to teach the people the law, but you're not really going to teach it to them. They're not really going to see what it is, right? So, take it back to our example of me resurrecting the dead, right? So if I resurrect the dead in front of Jerry, if I tell him about it, he won't believe me. I know he won't believe me. He'll say, you brought a defibrillator. I say, you can't, defibrillators don't work in the cemetery. He'll say, it must have been, right? If I show him a video, nowadays we know videos could just be fake anyways, right? If Steve wants Jerry to believe in ghosts, he's going to have to show him, right? right? But
Rabbi, I went to medical school in Missouri, at St. Louis. That's the show me state.
well, but if I show Jerry, right? If I show Jerry, then he'll be a changed man. He'll say, wow, the rabbi resurrected the dead. But no one will believe him, right? No one will believe him. He'll say, I saw it. No one will believe him, right? Everyone will say, which news sites are you reading, right? Now, if I teach him how to do it himself, then he can convince other people. This is what Yisro is telling Moses. He's saying, if you teach the law, everyone will listen to you because Moses, you're the greatest. However, if you teach him, Moses, they'll say, Moses, you're. If you teach everyone to say, Moses, you're right. We'll listen to whatever you say. But you don't want people to just listen. You want people to become teachers. You want people to internalize the ideas until they have them on their own. That's how continuity of Judaism will continue, specifically by the questions and the struggles and sometimes the void. And we fill up that void, then it becomes meaningful. This is what Yisro teaches Moshe. Now, Yisro is a professional. He's a priest, right? And he's serving idols, and he discovers God on his own. He discovers God on his own. The Zohar was of the opinion that Yisro came before the giving of the Torah. And it says that God would not have given the Torah until Yisro came. Why? Because specifically by Jethro, going and exploring all deities out there and going and serving every deity and practicing every religion, and then coming and saying, wow, God is truly greater than all the other gods. Specifically then did God see, wow, I will become internalized into the world. I will become part and parcel with people's society, with people's teachings. And that's what Yisro was able to tell Moshe, and that's what Yisro was able to give. I'm going to continue just a couple other points in the Parsha, but I just want to focus on just a couple things that we said here, which are very fascinating. Number one, a person should never say, it's not for me. It's too hard for me. Every single person is like a Jethro. Every single person has their life, which they live, which has the struggles, which has good things, which has hardships. Every single person has to find God and the Torah in their life. And that's a process which Yisro was trying to tell Moses about. That's how Judaism continues, and we all find it in our own life. We can't just, support people who are observant, but we actually have to bring it into our own life. Number two, Yisro, he would have, when he came, he actually got the greatest honor. God said the giving of the Torah is waiting for him to come, right? Because every individual has their own perspective, which is one of a kind in the world. No one else can think like each individual thinks. Every person has his own perspective on things, his own ideas. His brain has its own chemistry, works its own way. And every person has to go and internalize the Torah into his mind and to his life. The next thing is sometimes things take a long time. Sometimes we ask ourselves, why couldn't I have known this last year, 2 years, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Why did it only come to my knowledge now? Yisro teaches us that whatever knowledge we have in the world, it's our responsibility to find God in that knowledge. Use that as a pedestal to find God. And only we could do it. Every person has their own experience. But when we do that, whenever we come, our belief in God will be that much greater, will be that much more internalized. Whatever experiences we have to find God and realize that it wasn't by accident. This was actually God's plan. So this is what Yisro tells Moses. Moses says, I want to give it straight to the Jewish people. I want to give it the real way. Yisro tells Moses, no, you got to do the process. You got to work within each person's abilities. You can't just spoon feed it to them. And this is what Moses says, thank you to Yisro, and he hires all these judges. Sometimes in Chabad houses, you look at it, and I mean, in my experience, you say, hey, how come, I'm only getting this opportunity now? How come all Chabads kind of have the same, cycle where you go and step by step? Why does life have to be in steps? So this is a lesson we learned from this week's Parsha, when things are in steps and we're able to chew on them, able to absorb them like Yisro, only then do they really internalize and get to the nitty-gritty of the world. And this is what God wanted in giving the Torah. He wanted the Torah should come and take over humanity, starting with the Jewish people. The Jewish people should change their ways of living, and they should go and spread it to the whole world. And the only way to doing that is when it's in chewable sizes, like Moses ultimately does. And as we know, the Jewish people, after many years, we were in Israel, in Babylonia, and then we were spread around the whole world, right? And what we're essentially doing is like Moses, right? Of course, everything comes from Moses. Everything comes through Moses. But Moses made all the judges emissaries, and every Jew an emissary of his, to go and bring the ideas of the Torah to everywhere in the whole world. I want to talk another similar thing, which is a very interesting subject, which I don't want to go in fully because it's a lot longer than I thought it would be, but it's actually very interesting. So in society, we have a concept called ladies first. Anyone heard of it?
Ladies.
No one? Okay. Well, anyways, we have an interesting midrash in this week's Parsha. In this week's Parsha, Moses opens up the giving of the Torah, and God tells Moses, "So shall you speak to the house of Jacob, and you should tell over to the Jewish people." So Rashi in the Midrash says, who's the house of Jacob? The house of Jacob is the women, and the Bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, are the men. Rashi right away says, what is the difference between the men and the women? Well, the difference is the men have to hear about punishments. The women, you should speak softly and nicely to them. Right? That's what Rashi says. But I want to focus on another idea in the Midrash, the fact that the women were first. Why are the women first? So, the cheap answer you could say is ladies first, but a lot of times in Jewish law, in fact, we find our men are first, and also who came up with that idea in the first place? And now it gets complex because we don't really know who's a man and who's a lady anymore, right? So, that throws a wrench in it. So here's what I want to tell you. I want to tell you this interesting midrash, and I saw there's just some fascinating commentary on it. The midrash says, speak to the women, tell them the general rules. The general rules of the Torah. Then speak to the men, tell them all the details.
That's demeaning.
Details include the details and the punishments, right? So women, to tell them the general foundations of Judaism, and to the men, tell them the details and the punishments, right? Included in details are the punishments. You do this is going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. That's how the giving of the Torah starts. The Midrash says, why are the women first? So it says, because women act with haste to do a mitzvah. Women hastily follow commands of God, right? That's what it says.
What?
Right away, when women hear what mitzvah they need to do, they don't philosophize too much. They follow the directions. They do it joyously. Another opinion says, ultimately, it says women will have the home, and they will be able to guide the children in following the Torah, right? Women make the house kosher. They make the house for Shabbos, et cetera, et cetera. They will be able to guide the children. So this is the first aspect of the Medrash. We said 3 parts. It says, tell the women the general rules, right? Then why women first? Because they listen right away. And also because they will guide the children. Now, I just want to share something very interesting. I heard that the first Chabad Rebbe said he said that Jewish law I learned from my father, but Jewish holy prophecy and the Holy Spirit I learned from my mother, right? God said to Moses, the mothers, they will keep the spirit of Judaism alive. The laws give to the men. They will study the Torah. They will question and answer, et cetera, et cetera. They will break down the details, right? But the general rules give to the women. Now, I'm going to finish this midrash. I'm going to tell you some pretty amazing commentary. It says, Rabbi Tachlifa of Caesarea said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Kishabarasi ha'olam, when I created the world, Laitzi visi ella la'adam rishon. I gave one commandment. What was the first commandment when the world was created?
Let there be light.
No, God gave one commandment to Adam. Come on, one commandment. First commandment in the Torah. God said, Adam, do not do something. Don't eat from the forbidden fruit, right? From the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge. Right? So I told Adam, after I told Adam, Adam was the only guy, God took a rib from Adam and created Eve. Who told Eve about the commandment? Adam. Eve woke up. She was probably around 20 years old. She wakes up. Adam wakes up. And Adam says, by the way, there's just one. She says, what do I do around here? One thing not to do. Don't eat from that tree. And Va'avra, Eve didn't follow the command. She didn't hear it directly from God. And she sinned. V'kilkala sa'ilam, and the world was destroyed, right? We know that they got kicked out of the garden. Even death was brought into the world. All sorts of problems were brought on. Achshav, now God says, Im eini kair l'nashim tchila, hein mevatlas satira. If I don't tell the women first, right? If I don't tell the women first, the Torah won't be kept. That's why God told the women first. So again, at the beginning of the world, the creation of the world, God told Adam, and Eve didn't listen, right? Because she didn't hear directly from God. God told Adam, and Adam told Eve, and she didn't listen. And then she got Adam to sin. Now God says, first I'm going to tell the women, and then the men will follow suit. The men will follow suit. So why is that? There's a lot of interesting opinions. There's actually I'll just go through it briefly, but there's a lot of interesting discussion of what exactly this means and how exactly it is and why exactly it is. One of the commentaries, actually, I just remembered someone asked me a while back, it says that Eve, one of the ways she sinned is she was told not to touch the tree, lest she'll die. So she touches the tree, and does she die? No. She said, oh, this must be a mistake, right? So she eats from the fruit, right? Now, obviously, based on that commentary, Adam didn't tell her the full story, right? Adam kind of said, don't touch the tree. Just don't touch it. She tell her, a lot of times husbands who have big collections, the wives come and try and reorganize it, and the men are like, just don't touch it. Leave it the way it is, right? Anyways, Adam gave the slightly wrong instruction. But here is some of the opinions over here. Now, I just want to, there's a lot of interesting stories in the Talmud about if indeed are women, the word is mizdarzes b'mitzvah. They hurry to do a mitzvah. Do women indeed hurry to do a mitzvah? So there's certain places where it actually says certain places women are lazier than men, and certain places where women are more, have more alacrity than men. But I'm not going to go into that discussion now. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. It's actually kind of funny and amusing. It's a lot of fascinating stories of women who, one thing in the Talmud, it says women give tzedakah easier than men. Men a lot of times are always questioned, what is this for? What are you doing? Is it deserving? That women give it a lot easier. And we find instances in the Talmud that women are rewarded for that. But here what I want to talk about is we know that Adam was created and Adam was the only human, right? Adam was the only guy. Eve was created and she was the second person, right? Now, what do we automatically see? Eve is never going to be able to imagine what it's like to be the only person, right? Unless she kills her husband, right? But she didn't do that. And even if she would do that, she wouldn't be able to imagine until after. A lot of things in our lives, we can't imagine being out of it, right? So Eve is created. She is the receiver. Adam's the giver and Eve is the receiver. She's number 2. So one of the opinions says that God saw that the women are better receivers than men. They could follow the instructions without questioning it better than men. So give it to them first. And then once we give it to them, they will take it, they'll follow it, and the men will follow suit. In the Midrash, it says, actually, in another Midrash, it says that men, generally speaking, a lot of times they follow how their women run the house. That's how men follow suit. That's how the children follow suit. So here we have God giving it to the women, knowing that in a certain sense, they'll internalize it more than the men. The men are going to go, they're going to ask questions, they're going to find out the exact border of exactly what they need to do before getting punished, exactly what they don't need to do. But women are going to go and take it with simple faith. And that's one of the reasons why God wanted to give the Torah first to women, to introduce it to the women first, tell the general rules over to the women. That would create that it would last forever. They would be able to go and invest it in their family. And then men give them all the details. Now, we know that in world history, a little bit different now, but in world history, generally speaking, women a lot of times were home and men went out to business. So women essentially took care of the core of our lifestyle. The core is our home. The home is where we return. If someone's in business and they don't have anywhere to return at night, they won't last that long. It's very important to have that place, right? That environment. So here we find that God says, first give it to the women and then to the men. This has to do with what we spoke about earlier. We said that Yisro's message to Moses was not enough for people to follow, but they have to internalize it. Women are very good at internalizing it because they don't have a lot of commandments, but whatever they have, they create an environment with it. And they change the environment, and then they're able to raise their children and men, etc., to work in that fashion. So this is some excerpts from this week's Parsha. Just to summarize, we spoke about Yisro coming and Yisro arguing with Moses, and Moses giving us this new perspective. Yisro and Moses giving us this new perspective. Just because something looks good and it's finished doesn't mean it's actually good. Sometimes life gets messy, but it's always important to remember that the mess is in order to go and bring God to that place and go to bring God into your personal life, however messy it is. There's someone in town who always tells me, I wish I knew about this stuff earlier. I would have been a rabbi like you if I would have known about it. But the answer is God wanted him to go through his experiences to bring the Torah to his life in his place. And through that, Judaism will have continuity. This just reminds me of a story. I just arrived. I ordered a set of books for my kids. It's about 30 books of Jewish stories. I ordered this set and it just arrived yesterday. So one of the stories you read, I'll finish off with the story, is a story about the Shpala Zayda. The Shpala Zayda, Shpala was a town in Ukraine, or Russia, and he was called the grandfather of Shpala. Very interesting Rebbe. He lived about 250 years ago. But the story I read is someone once came to him and said, Rebbe, this was common back in the old Jewish community. One day, police show up at my house and they start searching through things. I have no idea what they're doing. I'm watching them going. They're digging around in my backyard and they find a box of jewels. And they arrest me. They said I stole it. I have no idea what they're talking about. I never had those jewels. I never stole anything. They weren't mine. Anyways, he said, they took me to court, whatever. I have a court case. They're going to give me 3 months in jail. The jails then were they weren't, nowadays they didn't give, like nowadays they didn't give vaccines in jail and stuff like that. Back then the jails were murderous anti-Semites there. You go as a Jew, they'd go just kill you, So the Rebbe tells him, I'll pray for you, but your sentences will be shortened for 1 month. He says, 1 month? 1 month isn't going to help. They'll kill me the first day. He says, don't worry, you'll survive. 1 month, though, instead of 3 months. He's supposed to get 3 months. So he sees that this follower is very disturbed and very scared. And he says, let me tell you a story. He says, when I was in many years ago, I was a student, and this is something that great rabbis used to do in the olden days. They were trying to find truth. They would go into exile. Exile means they'd leave their family, leave their house, be impoverished, and try and find themselves. Study Torah the whole day, the whole night, go to different towns. Many of them were very famous. They didn't want anyone to know who they were because they didn't want honor. They actually wanted to live as a poor person, kind of break down to their core. Anyways, says I was doing that and I was spending Shabbos in an inn somewhere. The guy invited me in. I was sleeping there. And there was another guy there named Chaim. Anyways, after Shabbos, Chaim steals one of the silver goblets and he puts it in his backpack. And we're walking out of the city together. And suddenly we hear the horse behind us. And Chaim looks back. He sees us, the inn owner. He says, can you hold my backpack for a second? I need to go to the bathroom. I take his backpack and he's gone. The guy comes, says, looks in the backpack. He finds his goblet. I have no idea where it's from. And I'm taking it to the city jail. I'm put in jail. I'm in jail there. This is what the Shpala Zeta says. And right away they come in and say, oh, here's a Jew. Give us your money. I don't have any money, right? They're going to kill me. One of the guys just about to hit me. And I pray to God. And his hand like suddenly swells up. And he's screaming in pain. And everyone says, wow, this is a holy rabbi. That's a miracle. We better not hurt him. Anyways, I'm in jail, and there's a gypsy in jail, and I'm talking to him, and it turns out that he's Jewish. There's a guy, they called him the gypsy. It turns out he's Jewish, and his parents died at a very young age, and he found gypsies to adopt him, and he joined them, and they stole all sorts of things, and he ended up in prison. So I start teaching him about Judaism, and he becomes more and more observant, starts keeping kosher and everything, and he decides, he says, I want to change my life. Anyways, one night, we see the guards are sleeping and the door is open in the middle of the night. Everyone's sleeping. So we walk out and escape easily. And this guy went and he moved somewhere else, changed his name, changed his identity, and he became an observant Jew. He tells us chassid, he says, when you go to jail, it's never by chance. You have a purpose there. So instead of 3 months, make sure you do it in 1 month. But anyways, everywhere we go, this is opportunity, like Yisro taught Moses, saw an opportunity to learn a new thing. Wait 1 second. And what, Jerry?
Go ahead. It's okay.
All right. Anyways, that's the lesson for today. Everyone have a great week and stay safe. It's icy out there.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.